All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our first ever after video panel discussion. Let me introduce our guest that we have today. I have with us Eric, who is one of our 14 years he's been with us. He's one of our senior analysts and precious metals consultants. We have Lynette Zhang, our chief market analyst. You know, I'm Eric Griffin, president of ITM Trading. And what we wanted to do today is, we did our first ever sort of video on confiscation, and Lynette wanted to really just lay it out for you law by law by law by law. And Eric's been a student of the confiscation piece for many years, and he does a really good job of kind of bringing it all together. So I wanted to just start off with this little panel discussion with Eric kind of giving a synopsis of all of it in a quick 3-minute to 5-minute little blurb so that you guys could kind of get a quick version of it. And then, excuse me, we also have a couple of topics that we're going to discuss. And then if you have any questions, you can shoot them to questions@itmtrading.com, and we can put those on some future Q&As that we'll do. Okay?
Yeah.
So,
and
go ahead.
by the way, we did not plan this coordinated ensemble. It just was a happy circumstance.
Okay, so Eric, you want to go ahead and give us your breakdown?
Yes, brief overview. Everybody talks primarily about Executive Order 6102, and that is the most talked about, most commonly looked at or researched piece. And what I found is, in over all my years of doing this and in my background in studying things and being a perpetual student, is that there are actually 10 executive orders that were tied to confiscation or recall between 1933 and 1974 when it became legal to own it again. Now, these executive orders, out of those 10, I found 5 that are pertinent, and I'd like to go through those. We know 6102, what were the pertinent pieces on that, is that you had...
We're recording from there, Eric.
So I need to look forward.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, yeah,
He's
sorry.
never been on camera before with us, so the camera's not actually there. It's up over here. We have 3 cameras in the studio, but we're using that one right
Okay.
now. All right.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
But anyway, going back to that, 6102 was the first. And in 6102, everybody knew that you had basically less than a month after April 28, 1933 to turn in your gold. And or you faced up to 10 years in prison and or $10,000 fine or both. The rule writers, however, they wrote an exception in because William H. Wooden, who was the Treasury Secretary at the time, previous Fed chairman, he was also a coin collector, an avid coin collector, and he wrote that exception in really for himself and for others within his same bracket, so to speak,
The
rule writers, the
1%ers.
1%ers, correct, Lynette, to basically give them the provision where they could transfer their wealth over an event and be able to reposition back into income-bearing assets on the other side of the event and do it legally and get the most out of it, obviously. So that was really for them, not for us. And that's what I've always told people on the phone that I'm talking to is if you look at history, it's got the most impact in a possibility of repeating itself. And that's why I want to let you know that it's still relevant today.
And what was that provision?
That provision was Article 2, Section B. If you look at the last line of Section B, it says if these coins have a recognized special value to collectors, they would be considered rare and unusual, thus would be exempt from a confiscation or from this confiscation. So that was the first order that happened, guys. And the next order and the orders following it were really to throw in addendums or amendments to the original order. And it was for several reasons. One, to completely define why these coins were exempt or what would be exempt and what the laws were. And the other was if they were currently working on trials where they were going to need it for a form of prosecution to help that prosecution in that trial or get the gold out of the people that were trying to avoid turning it in. And I won't go into that, but the next one was actually in, because this was April of 1933, the next one was in August of 1933, and that was Executive Order 6260. And what it basically stated was that the collector was the only one that was exempt. not the gambler, not the speculator, not the average Joe, not the criminal. Only the collector would be exempt. And it had to meet those guidelines of being historic, scientific, or numismatic in nature. And it had to be of a recognized special value to collectors, being a rare and unusual coin. So that was 6260. That was the second piece that was written against or written towards that. Then the next was in January of 1934, which is Executive Order 6556, which basically it stated three things, and this is very interesting. One is it reiterated that those coins had to be of historic, scientific, or numismatic nature, and this is a repeat, of course, of what we were talking about before, but this is pertinent. And they had to be of rare and unusual, and had to have that recognized special value to collectors. But it also went on, and this is where it gets interesting. It also went on because holding quarter eagles, $2.50 Liberties or Indians, were considered illegal at this time. But what they did, because the public, was not really happy with having to turn in their gold, is they wrote a provision in to appear less draconian in this effect, because these coins were given away in birthday parties, Christmas, bar mitzvahs, special events. They had a perceived sentimental value. So they didn't want to appear to be taking anything away from the public that had this perceived sentimental value. So what they did was they said if these coins could meet the same criteria as the original grouping of coins that was exempt on the prior executive orders, then you could hold up to 4 species of these 2.5 pieces, which basically means same type, same year, same mint mark, and you could do it legally. So they threw the public a bone in this, which I thought was interesting. And then the last provision in 6556 basically stated that if you were an artisan or using gold by trade, you could hold up to $100 worth of the gold legally. Okay? And this is where it gets interesting, but they said if you were going to do more than that, then you had to obtain special order and license from the U.S. Treasury in order to do so. So they were basically more or less cornering people. So now we fast forward. Let's go to the next executive order. This was Executive Order 11037. And 11037 was in 1962. It was under JFK's piece. And this was a twofold piece, in my opinion. It basically stated that it was now illegal to own gold offshore as a U.S. citizen. So if we backtrack a minute to go forward, if we look back before the original executive order was passed, the rich knew that that was coming. So what did they do? They drew as many gold pieces out of the banks as they could, and they transferred them over to European banks to avoid having them confiscated. They got them out of the country. And I don't know whether they knew or not. Who knows? We don't know. It's only speculation that they knew that provision was going to be in there, where they didn't make it illegal yet. But that happened in 62. And that was a big piece. And the other part of that was not just that it was illegal to own gold offshore as a U.S. citizen, but they wanted to basically repatriate that gold and get it back inside the United States banks' coffers. And that's really the whole provision for that. So that was a very important executive order. And then the last one was on December 31st, 1974, when it became legal to own gold again under the revocation order. Now, remember, I'd mentioned in the beginning that there were 10 executive orders that were tied to this original recall or confiscation, and that included 6102. But what was interesting about the revocation order, when Gerald Ford made it legal to own gold again, is that when he was stating that, he left 6102 out. That's still open. Why is it still open? That's my question, because historically when they leave something open, they tend to reuse it again. That's my opinion, and that's basically where I'm staying at. But why is it relevant today? It's relevant today because why did they call in gold? Well, let me give you one piece of information that I always tell people on the phone, because everybody, usually says, well, I don't believe it'll happen again. Well, here's why I believe it will. Up until December 31st, 2009, the Bank of International Settlements, they published a report annually that showed how much paper or derivative gold had been sold against how much gold physically existed estimated above and below ground. Well, folks, this is going to be a big number for you, and it's probably going to be hard to digest, because after December 31st, 2009, the Bank of International Settlements decided to divide that report into much smaller reports And then through an accounting process, they decided to compact those reports to make them look smaller than they really were. And I think a lot of the reason was it was still a growing position, and they didn't want it to appear so big that people would see it. It would be too, right in their face. So the reality is, what happened is they'd estimated that, basically let you know this, it's 423 trillion ounces, this is trillion with a T, of paper gold had been sold, paper gold, issued to the public, against an estimated 6.8 billion ounces that exist physically above and below ground. Now this is interesting. That number is so large. That means it was 62,000 ounces of paper gold estimated to have been sold against every 1 ounce that physically exists. Well, I don't know about you folks, but if I own a car and I print up 62,000 titles to the car and I sell those titles, who owns a car? That's me, So that's why I say I believe because of that large number and then having to make good on those contracts, there's two choices they have. In the event that they do a recall, why would they do the recall? To eliminate those paper contracts at a much cheaper price point. And why I'm saying this is because if you look at the numbers, they have two choices. If they default on those contracts, and you know how large the number is, and I believe it's larger today because they stopped reporting on it accurately back in 2009, I believe that number is going to be much greater today. So the reality is they have two choices. They go to the open market and buy to make those contracts whole. They roll them over, or they pay them out. So if they're going to the open market and buy, we know there's not enough gold to cover those contracts. So gold goes into backwardation. We've seen this happen before where it's been pushed out as much as 11 months when they have to settle contracts within 30 to 90 days, depending on the contract.
Eric, could
Yes.
you just define backwardation so that people understand that? Because that's could be very well a new term.
Well, backwardation basically means that, they basically don't have enough product to fulfill what's coming relevant on those
Coming due.
coming due. So when they have that happen, they have to make them whole. So that's why I said when they go to the open market to buy, they need to fill enough gold up to fulfill those contracts. And if they don't, that's where backwardation comes in, where there's not enough product to fulfill the contract. So basically, that was the problem that they would be looking at. But here's where it gets sticky. And this is what we're talking about, because everybody talks about the 1.4 quadrillion derivative market, okay? Well, in my viewpoint is, in looking at this, if they default on those, they can't go to the open market and buy. They end up having to basically say, we don't have the gold. Now they have to fulfill those via what? Paying the public back on them. Okay, well, how do you pay the contract holders back? They do it by strike price. And I'm going to make this real simple. I'm going to do it in terms of dollars. But as we know, gold's at right around $1,1500 now. Okay, well, a strike price, let's keep it simple. Let's say it's $1,000 strike price. Well, you've got that huge number.
Meaning strike price.
Strike price meaning like the spot price or melt value, that would be the strike price.
Okay.
So, to clarify, sorry about that.
That's
I get
okay.
going and I tend to
That's okay. You're
not
doing a great
include
job.
everything.
No.
But basically, thank you, 423 trillion ounces. Well, at a strike price of $1,000, that's $423,000 trillion. Okay, I'm sorry, but that's bigger than 1.4 quadrillion dollars. So at the end of the day, where's that money coming from, folks? I don't think they got it. Even if they had to print it, guess what happens? Hyperinflation, because they print too much money. So, sorry if I went too deep into this, but it's hard for everybody to see the whole picture if you don't include a lot of these facts.
Right.
And at the end of the day, and one thing I've realized in all my years of doing this is, and this is my opinion, is the reality is nothing is what it seems, folks. And what I found is the political parties exist to keep the public divided, because if the public were united, they'd never let a private central bank control this nation's currency or interest rates, meaning the Federal Reserve. This is all about the banks, folks. It's all about the numbers and what's going on with these markets and what they report, what they change the reports on. At the end of the day, it's up to you to decide what's relevant for you and what's your comfort level.
Thanks for that.
That was great.
Yeah, thanks for that synopsis. That was
See,
really
we
perfect.
have really smart people here, and we all work together. We are
Absolutely.
definitely a team. We are definitely a family.
I try to get more of them on camera. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. For
Yeah, we
having
have to
me.
thank you
So
for that.
I've aggregated a couple of just points that people have come up with over the last, couple of weeks. I've seen it over the years, but I wanted to bring them up, and because I know we all have our own opinions, and I thought it'd be cool for us to have these conversations,
Sure.
and then our viewers could kind of get our own individual feedback on these particular points.
Okay.
So
And keep in mind too that we always do the Q&As. So if anything comes up for you, just shoot a question to questions@itmtrading.com.
okay, so the first one, when it comes to confiscation, the first one that I see a lot of is they'll never confiscate gold because less than 3% of the population owns it, right? So, Lynette, why don't you speak to that one yourself, and then I'll have Eric give his opinion on that.
Okay, because where is that most of that gold in the public's hands held? Inside of IRAs and retirement plans, so they're inside of a depository. Now, if the government says we're going to take it, I don't know any depository that say, wait, we're not going to give it to you.
Mm-hmm.
So, frankly, it's pretty easy to. In addition to that, those that understand money own gold. It's pretty simple. So, and desperate governments do desperate things. So there are many reasons, and the laws are still all in place. But if they go to the cashless and they go to the negative rates, I mean, even cash can't protect your principal. It hasn't protected your purchasing power for sure, but you can't even protect your principal. Where's the real flight to safety going to be? Are they really going to want you or allow you to then go to safety?
Right, and I want to comment on that because that was one of the things that I was saying earlier. Because in my opinion, if they do a confiscation, it might not even be because they need the gold per se, right? They might not
just
need
like they did
it.
the silver in the 60s, right? They
Right.
didn't call it in, so they didn't need it.
Right, but if they want to block the flight to safety like you talked about, especially if the IMF plan goes into place, we go cashless, then they can go as deeply negative on interest rates as they want to force spending. Well, if they go deeply negative on interest rates and you've got $100,000 in the bank and it's losing 10% interest per annum, you're not going to keep it there. Well, if gold is going up during that same period of time, naturally it makes sense. I'm going to go into gold, right? So if they go that route, I personally think that they'll have to block that flight to safety,
Yep.
right? And so it won't necessarily be about, we need to get everybody's gold in our hands. It'll be, we need to make it illegal to own. We got to stop the outflow so that people do what we want them to do, not what they want themselves to be able to do, right?
But just to keep this in mind as well, I agree with that 100%, is, what the different kinds of gold. So when you're talking about like monetary gold, the bullion gold that you can hold inside of an IRA, this is actually why, and I say this all the time, I only like to buy the kind of gold that you cannot hold inside of an IRA because the government classifies it as collectible. It still has that status.
Right.
You want to
You
say
want to say
something
anything?
on it?
You have any feedback on this particular topic?
Well, I'll go back to the paper contracts that I was talking about earlier. I believe that, in the end of the day, that will be the reason why they need to recall gold or confiscate it again. And,
You think rather than just default on it, or just pay out in kind in dollars?
Well, they have to be able to make an attempt to do it the proper way, in the way they've done it before, to eliminate those contracts, to make them whole somehow.
Because you think that if they don't do that, then it shows a breakdown of the system?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yes, and keep in mind that very interesting little thing that I found in Dr. Ron Paul's study, where actually the Federal Reserve, the private bank, holds title to all of the Treasury's gold.
Right.
I mean, I think that's really interesting. How is that going to play out at that 42.22? But still,
yeah.
right? I mean, how
Yeah,
are they going to
yeah.
pay that out if all of our gold is accounted to and the Federal Reserve
But
actually holds title?
regardless, we know they're not going to be able to pay out on all the contracts.
Of
So
course
what?
not.
Do you think that ultimately they'll do it because there's a call on what 10% or
Well,
of the contracts?
I didn't say that they would, okay, be able to pay on all the contracts. I'd say that would be the reason too. And I believe the bullion, like we talked about earlier, would be the cherry on the top of the sundae. And the reason being is, people say, well, they can't call gold in again, okay, because last time we were on a gold standard. Well, that's true. And what really happened was, okay, let's go back in history. 1929, there was a run on the banks. People were lining up to get their money out of the banks. After 1933, there were lines again at the banks, but it was to turn in their gold for the money because cash was scarce and they needed the gold in their hoppers.
The banks did.
The banks
The banks
did.
did.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of those
Right, because then
pictures-
that allowed them to print more money, right?
Right. And the same thing is relevant today. If you're going to launch a new currency or you're going to tie currencies in a basket against something, peg them to something even fracturally. Because back then, you see, the Federal Reserve could only print as much money. It was up to 40% gold according to how much fiat money they could print. That allowed them to only print so much. The reason why they recalled gold is because they needed to print more money.
Right.
That's
Right,
the bottom line.
exactly.
So that's why they needed the gold back from the public. This time it would be a similar situation because now they're going to need the gold in the hoppers to tie it to the new currency somehow. Even though it might not be exchangeable, it could be a fractal backing. Just like we've talked about with the special drawing
SDRs,
right.
right,
Okay,
exactly,
and the IMF,
exactly.
and the fact that China is now in more control of that than they've ever been, and now they're in the top position.
So you're
in
saying
number
they
3
put a
position
gold
out of the
weighting in the
5.
basket in order to instill
They're
confidence.
going to have to.
Yeah.
Even Rickards has talked about that.
Yeah.
Actually, the IMF has talked about
Of
that.
course,
Yeah.
they've got it in their
So-
documentation in their meeting notes.
Well,
Exactly.
And that was one of the points another one of the points that I wanted to bring up, which is a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, they're not going to confiscate gold again because we'll have to go." Back then we were on a gold standard. Today we're not, so there's not going to be a need to.
Right.
But you're pointing to something else there, which is if we have to give confidence, and I know you talk about it a lot, and
All
we
the
talk
time.
about it in our Q&As a lot, which is putting a weighting into whatever the next currency is going to be, whether that's the SDR or not. Well, they'll need the gold in their coffers to do
It's
that.
part
To
of their
generate the
perception.
confidence.
That's their
Exactly.
perception management.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's how they reinstill confidence once this whole thing breaks down, in my opinion.
Okay.
Exactly. And not only that, but that opinion is supported by history. That they always end up
Precisely.
going back to
You're right,
gold,
Lynette.
which is also why they're probably accumulating massive amounts of it.
That's why the central banks are.
Yeah.
So another point that I get is, well, if they do confiscate gold again, they're not going to go door to door, right? Another one
It's
is, well, I'm
improbable.
just not going
Right.
to give it. I'm not going to give it up. I'm just going to hide it, keep it, right? So what do you think about that? Like, I know that they didn't. In 1933, they didn't go door to door, right?
No.
They just made it illegal to own. They made
Yes.
it a stiff penalty, and
Right.
then you couldn't utilize it.
But they
Right.
did go to door in India in 2016.
Well, I don't know. I've had a couple of our Indian watchers say that they didn't experience it, but it doesn't mean that it couldn't, right?
Right, because that was according to
So
the Treasury
I just wanted
Department.
to give that as a point of clarification that we've
That's
had
okay.
people who have come back and said that didn't happen here. So I wanted to make
do,
sure.
Do they have the capabilities to go door to door?
Why would they bother? There's not enough
but
gold
here-
out
Right,
there.
you make it the patriotic thing
Right.
to do to turn in your
That
gold.
was the old
and
saying,
you
Pay 'em a premium.
I know you feel like, because we've talked about this before, that they'll give the statutory rate of 42.22 an
Yeah,
ounce.
which I don't think so.
But I think
Personally.
you go, if fundamental value is 10,000, right, and then they go,
Well, hold on a second, really quick. I don't
Yeah.
mean to interrupt you, but let's talk about that for a minute. When they called gold in last time in 1933, the market value and the statutory rate were very similar. They were $20.67 an ounce, and we were very close to everyone around the world in that. But when they called that in and the public turned it in, they had it in their coffers, and they decided, okay, let's revalue this up to $35. That, in a sense, was a reset or a revaluation.
Yes,
think?
100%.
100%.
Okay, so
100%.
let's chat about this for a minute. Let's chat, because I think this is important. what it states basically is they have a legal precedent of doing it at the legal statutory rate. There's no other legal precedent out there. This is what they've done historically,
Right,
correct?
right, yeah.
Okay, that's my argument that I've used when you and I have been chatting about it before. But the thing is, let's look at this. That was a 70% devaluation, everything you turn in. The public lost 70% of their money by turning that in. And then it was illegal to own
Well, hold
gold
on, because
again.
the figure is 42%. Meaning from when they went from $20.67 to $35, it devalued the value of the dollar by 42%.
It was stated that it was a 70% loss.
It was a 42. I've done the math.
Well, okay.
So I just wanted to be clear.
Okay, that's fine. Even if it's a 42% loss, it's still a large loss. It's near, okay, even at 42, it's 50%, right? Almost. It's close. But the revaluation that's a huge hit on 100,000. That's $42,000. I don't know about you, but I don't want to lose $42,000 in that form. So, but the reality is it happened, and then it stayed fixed in rate until it was legal to own gold again in 1974, where then they raised it to the intraday rate of $42.22 an ounce. And to be exactly correct, and we can include this link, the U.S. Treasury has a ledger, gold ledger sheet on their website, and it shows the total amount of gold that they claim they hold, even though there hasn't been an official audit done on it since 1953, so we don't know if it's there or not. But let's say it is. It's around 263 million ounces in change at a valuation of about $11.4 billion at that rate, even though the spot gold or melt is at $1,400 right now, right? So at the bottom of the page, you go into the little notes at the bottom and it says this is based on a valuation rate of 42.2222 cents an ounce. Well, if the government's valuing their gold in deep storage at that rate, okay, why are they still doing it at that rate when gold's at this level? Number one. Number two is, why would they want to pay you more than what they're valuing their gold at? They don't have to justify it.
Well, other than what Lynette and I...
And I'm not saying that's wrong.
And I'm not saying you're wrong either, right?
Because we don't know.
We don't know.
Exactly.
This is all
We have no
opinion,
idea.
but it's based on research.
And it's
Right.
speculation on our
and
part,
connecting
right? So,
the dots, folks. This is
so
what it's about.
we always talk about, they've probably heard it a billion times from us, we always talk about that, you know,
They want
it's
an easy
easier
compliance.
it's easier to say, hey, it's illegal to own, so you're not really going to be able to use it anywhere. And we really need it because that's what's going to strengthen the currency and the economy and everything again.
Right.
So it's $1,500 an ounce. We're going to go ahead and give you $1,500 or $2,000 an ounce for it. So people go, oh, you know, heck, they're going to give me my money for it. It's illegal. I don't want to mess around. Or you know what? Let me make the $500, not realizing that that when they allow it to go to the fundamental value of 10,000 or whatever it is at that time, now the purchasing power just of their dollar just dropped 400%. Right. And because that's exactly what they did in 1933. They took it all in, gave people the price. Everyone's like, okay, here you go, and then
and
boom.
Going back to that 1933
revalue it.
point, though. Going back to that 1933 point, when they told them they had to turn it in, they were willing to turn it in. Why? Because cash was scarce. And it made them they felt forced, or they felt obligated, or by necessity that they need to eat and provide for their family, that they had to turn in to get this cash. So there's legal precedent of them doing that. Mm-hmm. That's why I keep going back to the 4222 myself, but that's my opinion.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing that I kind of, when you were talking about what happened in 71, I think we will also need to really look at what happened before 71.
Right.
Because there were basically two gold markets. There was the fixed gold market, and then there was the real market based upon supply and
Correct.
demand. And what I found extremely interesting was the fact that they legalized individuals owning gold certificates again in 64. And what was that price based on? Probably, I don't know the answer to that. I gave you the link for that.
$35,
Probably $35, exactly. Mm-hmm. Now, who would have even known about that? So part of what we're looking at is going back to that perception management piece, and going back to that 1%er piece. You know, they're going to set it up however they set it up. The most likely outcome, in my opinion, is that they're going to set it up where you just have this small group that benefits from this and nobody else knows it. So I don't think they're going to want any pushback.
And that also tells me I'd rather follow what they do so I can have the options they have than follow what everyone else is doing and end up in a
Exactly.
sinkhole.
That's a very
my
good
own
point.
opinion, you know, because I want to get the most out of this too. I want my clients to get the most out of this, and that's why I educate them to this level and let them make the choice.
Right.
That's what's so critical. It's a choice,
Right.
folks.
It is a choice.
It's based on your comfort level and what you're trying to achieve.
Exactly.
That's the way we work it.
Right, and we sell all types of physical metal.
Sure we
you
do.
know, and a large portion of what we sell, a decent percentage of it is actually in physical gold and silver bullion. And so, we like to be education first. We like to tell people, let them know what the deal is. It's the reason why Lynette doesn't own any bullion,
I
right?
don't either.
Exactly. And so
Does anybody here actually own
I
gold
don't.
bullion?
I haven't. I see everyone's transactions,
Right,
obviously, because I
that's
run
why I'm asking
operations,
you.
and
If
I
there's
haven't
any,
seen
it's a
anybody.
small percentage. It's
Yeah.
a very small.
Yeah, I don't
It might
think
be in
any-
silver, you know,
Well, it's silver, yes.
but that's different.
But
you know.
yes, so we're talking about two
But-
different beasts.
Couple breakables.
Mhm.
Oh, you have some breakables?
Breakables. Yeah, they might. Yeah, that's possible.
Right, just for the event if they need to do the
Possible
bartering or whatever,
interim
and
in
it's
between
still
a
allowed
reset,
to be there.
bartering and
Yeah.
reset, what have
So,
Right.
we practice what we preach here, but we
Yeah,
want to
most
make sure
definitely.
that you guys are educated first and foremost, and that's always our goal. It's the whole point of this channel. And so, is there anything on that note that we want to say? We're at 31 minutes on this portion, and the video itself is 39, so we're already pretty far into this video. We can go, if there's a ton of demand for questions on this, we can always get our panel back live and
Yeah.
do one live.
Yeah, it's a broad topic, and it's one that
And it's an
deserves
important
it deserves
one,
the attention that we're trying to give it.
Right.
That I have been in this. I've been with ITM a long time. Eric said
Yep.
14 years, but to give you a little bit of an idea on my background, I started very early because I inherited my grandfather's collection upon his passing, which was like a sock full of coins that they'd thrown up before the Great Depression. And he died in 1977. My grandmother gave me that in 1978. And I rolled that out on the bed and thought it was the coolest thing since sliced bread, but I didn't know anything about it because I was really young, folks. And I looked at that and I said, I had one question for her. I said, Grandma, why is there no gold in here? And she goes, Son, they took it from us. And
I got goosebumps.
I was blown
with that.
away when she said that, but you know what? It was the coolest thing. I started reading it. I started looking for information on it. They bought me a red book back then because that was the thing to get, Whitman Red Book. And I was looking at this, and I was looking at all these different things, and then I started going into coin dealers in Albany, Oregon. And that was really an interesting experience because if they wanted something, they knew how to get it, And
Yeah.
I didn't know entirely how to do trades at that time, but I learned quickly, and I learned how to catalog the collection and move forward. And what was funny is, and I'll tell this real quick because this is so important, is there was a penny they were looking for in there. It was one of the San Francisco mint pennies right around the time of the earthquake, so it was pretty rare. And they said, if you can find this, I'll give you $13 for it. And I'm like, $13 for a penny? And I said, that's cool, because that's enough I can buy a digital watch. And that was so big in 78, and I said, man, this is way cool. So I found it, and I said,
Digital
I got
watch
my
today is
digital watch.
400.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's
It's like
because-
the iWatch, it's the same thing, but back then it was
Thank
a big,
you,
big
inflation.
cutting edge
Right.
thing.
Well, but thank you, inflation,
Exactly,
too.
exactly.
Because,
But what it led me to was it got me so enthrived in this that I started getting into other collectibles back then. And I started attending shows, and I went to coin shows, and I later became a dealer at shows. And then later, by the late 80s, a promoter of regional and national shows. But in the early 80s, 82 to 80, I think it was 86, I had a store. It was called Behind the Plate, but I had sports cards and I had coins. And back then, I was doing shows, and I got a write-up in the Baseball Card Hobby News as being one of the youngest dealers in the nation with my staff of Behind the Plate. And that was so cool, but it got me into understanding the retail side of this because then I had a second store in the early 90s, retail storefront. And then that made me want to come here to be a broker.
I'm glad you did.
So it just, that's the way I played into it. So I've been around it for 42 years. So this is not my first rodeo in this.
Well, that's why we wanted to bring you on, because you're a
Exactly.
student of the game, and I super appreciate you coming on and doing this with us.
Why, thank you.
It's our first time, and I think it went really well, and I appreciate it. So,
Yeah,
My
me
pleasure.
too.
I'm
This
happy.
was fun.
questions
I
at
was excited.
itmtrading.com. Until we see you next time.
Please be safe out there, and remember that financial shields are made of physical gold and silver.
Yes.
So be careful out there. Bye-bye.
Bye.